Hi, my name is Leslie Clausen, and I am going to deconstruct the depth cues in Blocked In. I have become obsessed with depth cues lately, and after reading Jesse Schell's article on what I learned from I Expect You to Die, his reference to Blocked In got me really interested. There are credits below related to the great, amazing developers who made this experience, as well as some links to the research that I looked up to understand depth cues. So let's just get into it. Okay, let's just take a quick look at the environment first. It looks like you're sitting at a desk here. It's creepy and kind of strange, and it's got a great story, kind of narrative elements built into it that you get to kind of deconstruct. You can see these crazy blocks coming down from the sides. You're in a really cool room. Beautiful sound. It's a great experience. It really needs to be felt in VR. It really needs to be felt in VR. So yeah. Now you've kind of got the feel for the space. I'd like to talk about the first depth cue, which is accommodation. So accommodation is, so if I look at this pipe, for example, I'm looking up, and I notice that the ceiling is blurry and the pipe is in focus. That happens all the time. Here it doesn't translate well because you're not seeing it with stereoscopic vision in the helmet. And if you would, the ceiling would look a little blurry and the pipe would be in focus. And that is a depth cue. It happens when you're looking at things that are close up, about 2 meters from you. Now there's this other thing called convergence. It's when your eyes turn inward, almost like often it's called pigeon toe as well, when your eyes turn inward. It's the angle of your eyes turning inward that give you a sense of depth information. So just your eye movements alone, your brain can understand, you know, oh, my eyes are moving more pigeon-toed to see this close thing, or more pigeon-toed to see this close lamp, and I now get a sense of the depth. Versus me kind of looking back, my eyes are less converged, and my brain understands that the distance of the corkboard. So that's a depth cue that happens, called convergence. Another thing that happens is called parallax. So look, as I move this, you know, I'm kind of moving, sorry, it's a little bit out of the fulcrum here. Now I'm better. I'm moving side to side, and you see the posts and the content in the front move faster than the window and the buildings in the back. That's parallax. Parallax works actually both in monocular and stereoscopic representations of the image. So you saw parallax right there, as if you were holding one hand over your eye, and that's a reason why some people who can only see through an eye actually still get a really powerful experience in virtual reality, like my sister-in-law, who only has one eye to see from, but still can understand depth, and that happens through parallax. And that's those are some depth cues. There's some more here. There's something that is called binocular disparity. So binocular disparity is basically how we see depth most of the time in our regular life. We have a left and right eye that are approximately 6.5 centimeters apart, and those differences, that distance creates, you know, seeing things from two sides, and it gets combined, and your brain creates depth. That's what we see in every day in our life, and we're very familiar with binocular disparity, and that's a depth cue. And we get some of these depth cues just because the hardware allows for them, and some we have to design for. I'd like to talk about linear perspective. Linear perspective is looking at the buildings behind here. You'll notice that if you look at the rooftops and kind of trace your eyes along the rooftops, you'll see that they all kind of converge into a space that, or they don't converge into, they converge to a point. And all of the rooftops, if you follow along them, they all converge to a single point of perspective. And that is a depth cue that your brain uses to understand the depth and the size of those buildings. There's also something called, well, it's just the common size of objects. So for example, if you look around here, you'll see a glue bottle and a spray bottle and that tin can with pens and pencils. And on this side, you see, you know, a NES and a Game Boy and a 1.44 megabyte floppy container, or 1 1/4 inch floppy container. And the saw, all those things we know, and because we know them, we understand their size, and the brain will start actually looking at them and start deriving depth information. So here it's obviously very important to understand the scale of this desk and how things work by looking at all these different common objects that we're familiar with, and it starts building a sense of how big things are and what the depths are. Another thing that you'll notice too is something called texture gradients. Or texture gradients, if you look here, all the textures are fairly detailed. The corkboard has that kind of corky feel. The saw has some kind of fine little kind of scratches and elements. And you'll notice that even though it's very artistically stylized, the textures are quite detailed. And as you kind of look around and you go to the back of those buildings again, for example, you'll notice that the textures on the buildings are pretty minimal and simple. So that texture gradient also is a depth cue that was used in here. And what's amazing is that is how absolutely kind of like how they incorporated all of these depth cues, and I think that is a big part of what makes this thing work. On top of an incredible kind of visual narrative and an audio soundscape that just kind of puts you into it as well. But these depth cues are really important. I want to talk about overlapping. So look how these little like folders and the kind of the post and the kind of chicken wiry kind of stuff here overlaps the windows, and then the windows are overlapping into the buildings back there, and the ceiling, the hole in the ceiling above it is overlapping the planks that you can see through into. And the ceiling fan is overlapping the ceiling, and then you've got the hole. And then if you look at all those objects there, like basically the table and all these cubes, there's overlapping because you can see one thing in front of another. The knives that are in front of the newspapers on the wall. So the curtains that are overlapping the windows, the carpet overlapping the wood. So all this overlapping that's happening as well is also giving you depth cues. Especially some of these more drastic ones where you see through a window into the buildings, right? You'll also notice that there's something called not only the common size of objects, but you notice that things farther away are smaller than things that are up close. So those buildings are actually, even though they're bigger, they look smaller because they're farther away. And you couple that with the overlapping, you start getting some really important depth cues. While I'm looking out here, I might as well talk about aerial perspective. So things that are far away are foggy. And here you can see that kind of overblown light effect is actually kind of creating that fogged out like effect. Not only is it like kind of ethereal and like it's like really fantastical, it's also causing us to interpret depth. And finally, shades and shadows. And as you can see, this big block just went by and blocked that shadow out, right? And then now we know right away the fact that that happened, that giant shadow happened, that block is pretty massive, because we're understanding that the window is a certain size that we recognize, and because we understand the common size of objects, something that completely blocks out the window must be massive, right? So that's going back to that one. Let's go back to shadows. So shadows do a whole bunch of things. One, if we know the source of the light, and in this case the light, it looks like it's coming from, sorry, I'm going to try to see if I can grab it, see it, but it's kind of if you look out the window and up that way, it must be coming that way in order to cast a light into the back. So we know that the shadow is coming over my left shoulder. The light's coming over my left shoulder, essentially, through the windows. Kind of that way. That means that anything that is lit, that we can see it's lit, we know that we can see the light, means it's closer to the light source, and things that are dark, that are falling in shadow, are further away from the light source, just by the nature of understanding where the light source is. And that itself is a depth cue. And also, things that are brighter seem closer, and things that are darker seem further away. So what's interesting is it's a little counterintuitive looking that way, but if we look over here, that even here we have this very lit scene in front, and this like really dark area there. And that is actually creating a bit of an exaggerated sense of depth. And so I'm sure there are more depth cues, and I'm still learning this process. But after spending an evening in Blocked In and doing a bit of research, I hope my reflections on Blocked In depth cues will be helpful.